Okay, the first step in the nail it then scale it process is determine whether or not your idea is good. To do this, we have 3 tools that can help you. The first is the big idea hypothesis test. The second is the hassle test. And the third is the virtual prototype test. We will have a separate training video for each of these tools. The chapters in the book, Nail It Then Scale It, that you will reference to determine whether or not the idea is good are 1 through 6. Let me launch now right into the first tool, which is the big idea hypothesis test. At the risk of shortchanging some of the future videos and tools, let me say that I do believe this is the most unique step in the Nail It Then Scale It process, and possibly even the most important, and probably one of the most frequently skipped steps. As you can see from this quote in the Harvard Business Review, it is absolutely imperative that you accurately define your problem. Now, to find a problem that's worth solving, we suggest that you need to start with a pain, and you need to start with a monetizable pain. Now, a pain could be something like a mosquito bite, which is kind of annoying, or it could be like a shark bite, which, having never had a shark bite myself, fortunately, I can only imagine is very painful, and you would require immediate medical attention. So we are looking for business ideas, concepts, things that actually have a shark bite level of pain for the customers that you are trying to sell to. Why start with pain? We're assuming you're watching this video because you're in the same boat as most startups, where you don't really have a big track record, you don't have a lot of money. I'm guessing you probably don't have $4 billion to create a market for a product like an iPad. And so starting with a monetizable shark bite level of pain, which can be defined as a 4 out of 5 on a pain scale, will exponentially increase your odds of success. In today's day and age, there are so many small startups out there. You know, there are 600,000 apps on Apple's App Store. How are you going to stand out? How are you really going to get customers to select you over the other alternatives? We think starting with a pain that customers are begging you to solve is a great place to start. Okay, now we're going to talk about how to apply this to business, B2B, or business to consumer, B2C settings. In reality, Nail It Then Scale It, the book, was really written for business-to-business applications, though it can apply to both. In a business-to-business setting, what we're essentially looking for is to have you call the businesses. Call your customers, talk to them, cold calls. These are not your friends. These are not your family. But if you can get people to accept your cold calls and indicate to you that, yes, we have a shark bite pain, and we actually want to talk to you again, even though we don't know you, then that's one way to gauge whether or not you're on the right track. And we will provide more tools around this in coming slides. Now, if you're selling business to consumer, you're likely not going to focus on a pain. Though there could be a pain, it may be that you need to focus instead on delighters. Or you could, if you're making a video game, for example, measure how long people are playing it for, how engaged they are with your tool. For example, Facebook, you wouldn't think that it necessarily solves a pain, but it does. I mean, people have needs for social engagement and social interaction with others and to stay in touch with their friends. So you may need to think a little more creatively, but it's still definitely applicable for business-to-consumer settings. To illustrate the principle of a monetizable pain, I'm going to start with a case study. And let me disclose right up front, I am involved personally as the COO and CFO of Respia, which you see on your screen. I will then talk about another company called Likester. As I'm going through these examples, please think to yourself, which of these companies has the greater monetizable pain? I'll start with Respia. Respia was created to reduce the incidence of ventilator-associated pneumonia in the intensive care units, or ICUs, of hospitals. So Respia is a solution that mimics the body's natural tracheal secretions. You'll notice, most likely, your saliva is not salty, right? Salt does not belong in your trachea. So the problem is, if you're in a hospital and you're on a ventilator for mechanical ventilation, in order to breathe, then you have an endotracheal tube, which can become clogged with secretions, with mucus, with blood, with gunk. And to get those secretions out, hospitals will typically instill saline into the endotracheal tube to loosen up the secretion so that they can then be sucked out the endotracheal tube. Now, the problem is that saline actually deactivates the body's natural ability to fight off infection, and the use of saline has been shown to actually increase the rate of ventilator-associated pneumonia, which is a serious complication. It has a 24% mortality rate, and it can add days or even weeks to your hospital stay. It's a very expensive proposition for hospitals. Respia was invented to solve this problem and mimic the body's natural tracheal secretions, thereby reducing ventilator-associated pneumonia rates. And in fact, there was a multi-center, multi-thousand patient clinical study that was published in a peer-reviewed medical journal that showed that, yes, in fact, Respia does significantly reduce ventilator-associated pneumonia. On the other side, you see Likester. Likester is a small software startup company that essentially helps small businesses, dentists, lawyers, auto mechanic shops, restaurants get more likes on Facebook, get more Google reviews, get more social media exposure so that these businesses can then rank higher on search engine and basically walk more customers through their doors. So the concept of Likester is to have a sticker. It's a QR code sticker that can be placed at point of sale. So rather than having your restaurant say, hey, if you liked your service today, remember to like us on Facebook, or here's your receipt. Oh, if you take this survey, you can qualify for a $5 coupon. I don't know about you, but I rarely, if ever, take up those opportunities unless I want to complain about that business, right? And so this will help at the, as you get your bill at the restaurant, you can immediately scan it and say, I like this restaurant. And so it actually does increase the ability of restaurants and small businesses to get likes on Facebook and more Google reviews. Now, to accurately assess the pain, we're going to give you a tool called the Big Idea Hypothesis, or BIH. What it is, it's a specific kind of elevator pitch. A lot of you already have elevator pitches, short descriptions of your business that get people excited about it. Well, this elevator pitch is going to be focused on a monetizable pain rather than your overall business. And at this stage, please realize it's just a blueprint. It's a hypothesis or a guess. Realize your first big idea hypothesis that you write will probably not be the best answer. You will probably have to iterate multiple times on this, and that's fine. That's normal, and we hope that you do, because we want you to improve and iterate, and that's just the general spirit of Nail It Then Scale It. The BIH, or Big Idea Hypothesis, will be written for a specific customer. The question is, who is your customer? Too often, I ask this question to entrepreneurs or even established businesses, and the response I get is, well, geez, our customer is a small to medium-sized business. Oh, great. Can a small to medium-sized business create a purchase order and sign it and talk to you? No, a person at or within that small to medium-sized business can. What we're looking for when we talk about customers is an actual person with an actual job title. And in the case of Respia, for example, it would be a respiratory therapist in a neonatal intensive care unit with 50 beds or more. So you can see that's a very specifically defined customer. And we like that because it makes the pain easier to test. If I'm talking to small to medium-sized businesses in general, it's going to be hard for me to get consistent, reliable, accurate feedback. It's going to be all across the board if I'm talking to everybody. What we want is to find the real, true customer. Now, if you are selling business to business, you may have to deal with what we call a buying panel rather than just a single individual. So a buying panel could consist of up to 3 different buyer types. For example, there could be an end user, which is who we typically think of when we think about customers. The end user will be the person who's actually using your product. In the case of Respia, again, it would be that respiratory therapist who's instilling the Respia solution into the endotracheal tube. But there could also be other buyer types. There could be a technical buyer. So there could be, for example, in the case of Respia, a person who makes clinical decisions at the hospital whether or not they should adopt new products. And this could be based on clinical data. It could be used on actual use of the product. But this technical person, who could also be, for example, an IT person in a large organization, can have the power to say no or yes to your solution. So if this buyer is not on board with your solution, it's going to cause problems even if the end users like it. There's also another buyer type called the economic buyer. In the case of large purchase orders, it could be that a vice president of finance or someone like that needs to sign off on purchase orders or make financial analysis-based decisions on whether or not it's a good idea to install your product or purchase your product or use your product. Again, this person has the power to say yes or no. We suggest that you will eventually need to write a big idea hypothesis if you are selling into a customer with this type of buying panel that addresses a real shark bite pain for all three of these buyers in order to make your life as easy as possible and to make you more successful. Typically, when we suggest you start the process, we suggest that you start with the end user, just because it's the customer we most readily understand. So as we go through this example, you can start with the end user, or if you prefer, you can start with one of the other two types. The trick then is to find a sample of these customers. So you've got a very specifically defined customer, and you have a customer type, an end user, economic, or technical buyer. You're going to need to find a sample of these customers to talk to. This is where some people can run into trouble, right? Where do I find respiratory therapists in NICUs with 50 beds or more? Fortunately, in that case, it's really easy. You just call the hospital and ask to speak to the respiratory therapist in the neonatal intensive care unit. But in other cases, we've seen many people struggle with this step. And so there are a lot of tools out there like LinkedIn, like data.com that's run by Salesforce. It used to be called Jigsaw. You can purchase lists. You can go hang out in the parking lot of Home Depot on a Saturday and pull people aside. There are different ways to get customers, but you need to find customers who are strangers. Again, we don't want you talking to your family, to your friends, the people that are most likely going to encourage you. We want you to talk to total strangers who are going to give you honest feedback, who probably just want to get rid of you as fast as possible. And if they end up not getting rid of you as fast as possible, is a very good indication that you're addressing a real pain for them. The trick then is to go test the big idea hypothesis with these customers. And we want you to talk to at least 10, right? Definitely talk to more if you want to talk to more. The real trick is talking to the first one. Again, it's hard to cold call people. It's not fun for most of us, right? But it's very critical that you start this process. And in fact, most people will not be mean. Most people will not be jerks, right? You'll get a lot of voicemails that are never returned. But when you actually get someone on the phone, you need to make sure that you're taking notes. You're paying attention to what they're saying and you are listening rather than talking the whole time, right? So again, avoid the temptation to sell. But you want to listen, you want to understand, and you want to develop a relationship with this customer that you can use later on, right? For the younger generation, we need to make sure that we are talking to these customers and not just typing. The temptation is to just do an online survey, right? That's not what we are talking about here with the BIH test. Now, as you go through this, do not overreact. There may be a temptation to say, oh, shoot, this first customer thought my idea was terrible. I need to change everything right now. No, talk to a group, talk to 3, talk to 4. But look for common themes before you start reacting and making changes. And as I've mentioned before, it is likely you'll need to make changes and adapt, right? It could be that you need to change the verbiage in your elevator pitch, big idea hypothesis. It could be you need to target a different group of customers. Maybe it's not respiratory therapists I should be talking to, but neonatologists or a different group of customers. So you may need to adapt. But don't overreact, look for themes, and talk to at least 10. Having done this many times, I've found that even talking to a handful of customers, though the sample size may seem small, is far more valuable than doing months and months of Google searches and internet research, which always seems to basically corroborate that my idea is good anyway, right? Whereas customers will tell you the truth. Now we're going to introduce a term right now that will be used throughout the rest of the training videos, which is proceed, pivot, or punt. So in the vernacular of the lean startup today that's so pervasive, everyone is talking about pivoting. Well, how do you know when to pivot? Why would you pivot? How do you pivot, right? We're going to provide some practical advice on how to do this. So in the case of a BIH, or big idea hypothesis test, we suggest you proceed if you go out and you talk to 10 customers and at least 5 of them say, that is fabulous. I need you to solve that problem for me. Here is my contact information. Call me when you have a product to show me. That's a good indication that you have a shark bite pain. And we suggest that you can proceed with the rest of the videos, with the rest of the process, with the next step, if you can hit that benchmark. Now, if you don't, if you have 40% of people saying, yeah, that sounds like a nice idea, that's a lot different than people saying, I need a solution. Thank you for solving this for me, right? That's the kind of response you really need to find to indicate that you're on the right track. So if you fall short of the proceed goal, You can pivot, so you could change your customer group. You could change the verbiage in your big idea hypothesis. You could change a lot of different things. Now, the time to punt is really up to you. It could be that after 4 or 5 pivots, you decide this just isn't worth it. I need to move on to another idea. Because we know, as an entrepreneur, you have a lot of ideas, so you might as well just try another one at this point. And the good news is you spent exactly $0 to kill this idea quickly before you prematurely scale, before you invest in a team and get office space and spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars building a product no one wants to buy. Let's find out now for free, just by testing the pain. Now the temptation as you go out and do this test will be, especially if you already have a product developed or in development, to show the product. We're really focused on the pain at this stage rather than the product. So very specifically, you need to focus on the pain rather than the solution at this stage. So let me go ahead and wrap up the Respia case. So the Respia case is a sad story. I did not have access or knowledge of Nail It Then Scale It when the business Respia was started. So we went ahead and we did some great internet research. And the inventor who we licensed this product from had felt a real pain. So he was a neonatologist. He saw babies were coming down with ventilator-associated pneumonia and literally dying. And so he created Respia to solve this problem. Well, we believed him that this was a problem, and we went out, we raised money, we created the solution, we executed all of our project milestones, and it's now 1.5 years later that we've been selling the product, and we actually just have decided to sell off our existing inventory and close the business because there is not a monetizable pain. Now you're asking yourself, how could babies dying not be a monetizable pain? Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. The first of which is, even if there is a neonatal intensive care unit that has ventilator-associated pneumonia, it usually happens very rarely or infrequently. So it's not really a big issue. If you're working in an intensive care unit, there are patients dying on a regular, frequent basis, right? And if you have 1 or 2 a year that pass away due to ventilator-associated pneumonia, it's not a super high priority to you, though it is tragic, right? The hospital industry noticed a couple of years ago saline was causing problems. And they instituted policies and clinical protocols saying that you should not ever use saline and switch to instead dry suctioning, which is the official policy of most hospitals. And dry suctioning is great in most cases, but does not always work with tenacious secretions. So the problem our sales force had when they walked into a hospital, they said, we're going to replace saline and reduce ventilator-associated pneumonia. And almost without exception, every hospital said, we don't use saline, even though they really do. And we don't have ventilator-associated pneumonia, even though they usually really do. So if you have to convince someone they have a problem, it's basically a nail in the coffin of your sales process. It's a terrible place to be. So what we're trying to help you avoid is that exact situation that Respia is in. We need to find a problem that immediately resonates with almost every customer we go talk to. Fortunately, we were able to avoid even further agony by coming across the Nail It Then Scale It process later in the stage of Respia's business to shut down a second idea, which we thought, again, was really good. As it turned out, we cold called various hospitals and quickly discovered that it was not a very good idea. Now, I don't consider this a failure. I consider it a great success for my business because we avoided repeating the same situation where we invested a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of hours in a product that delivers minimal revenue and does not achieve the financial goals of the owners of the business. Likester, on the other hand, is still open. This is a company I'm still working with. It's a new product, but they took the Nail It Then Scale It training. They came to the training with an idea for SaaS, software as a service model, for attorney case management software. They were very excited about it, and they had spent, I think, years building that software, getting it ready to sell. They came to the training, and even though they had a product to sell, they decided to follow the process strictly and went out and tested just the pain. They found exactly what we discussed earlier. About 40% of their customers, attorneys, were saying, yeah, that software sounds like a good idea. But they weren't saying, geez, that is fabulous. I need to have it. Please give me here's my contact information. Contact me when it's ready. So the guys at Likester thought, well, geez, let's go out and find a different pain. And so they tested various pains. They pivoted a few times until they eventually thought, well, is it a problem for attorneys to attract new clients? How do you find an attorney? So if you were to Google attorney and then type in your city's name, you would see a list of attorneys come up on Google that are ranked based on the number of Google reviews they have in Google Maps. And so Likester said, let's develop an easier way using just a simple QR code and a sticker and a really scalable mobile website that can be created in 5 minutes for any customer and charge a minimal one-time fee price for this kind of service. They went out and tested this and got 80% plus positive response rate saying, I wish you had the product now. I would buy it from you today. That is the kind of reaction we're looking for in the big idea hypothesis test to know you're on a right track. It doesn't mean you're going to be a successful business. There could still be a whole host of other issues, which we'll talk about later, in building the product, in executing on a business model profitably. But it's probably worth investing more of your time and money if you can get this kind of reaction from your customers at this early of a stage. Some final remarks on the big idea hypothesis test. As you do this, we discussed earlier intellectual honesty. Please be intellectual honest as you do this. Don't go out simply looking for confirmation that you're already on the right track. Go out with intellectual honesty. Try and find out and gauge the true pain level, because it will save all of us a lot of trouble later on if we actually do it in this manner. The sad reality is that many, and perhaps most, ideas will, and in fact should, fail at this stage. 80% of new businesses fail. And even among the 20% who don't technically fail, they could end up in a category like Respia where you make a small amount of money and you're not technically out of business, but it's a real drag on your time and resources and money. And you wish you were out of the business, and it's just hard to extricate yourself. So why not prevent all that? Kill ideas now. Move on to idea number 37 in your queue and try that idea. Now is the time to access the Big Idea Hypothesis tool, which will walk you through step by step how to create a big idea hypothesis. The temptation will be to make that paragraph really long. What we want you to do is keep it clear, compelling, and very simple. It's also important to involve your entire core team so that you can have a very good discussion around what your business really does, what the true pain is, and what the value is. It could well be this is the first time you've had this kind of conversation, and we think it's very important. Now, it's also important to track all of your responses. It's good to talk to people, but it's better to talk to people and record what they said and when they said it and how they said it. So record all the responses, track the response rates. And again, what we're looking for is at least a 50% response rate of people you're cold calling who say, that is fabulous, I need the product. Now, I know we spent a lot of time on this video, but it's very important, and this lays the foundation for the entire rest of the training. And I hope that the case study, where you can learn from my mistakes, will help you avoid similar situations and be more successful in your own businesses.